We'll be talking this morning for sure with Ms. Cazelle Jackson. She's the deputy political leader of the PDP in Trinidad, and she's calling on the chief secretary at the Tobago House of Assembly to apologize to the leader of the party, Mr. Watson Duke, given their tiff that is taking place. And she says that it is incumbent upon Mr. Augustine to do the same. That matter continues to occupy space in the journalism of today, and we want to get, again, to some extent, behind what has happened with these two gentlemen. What appears to be the issue? What is the issue in this break in their communications, one to the other? And also we'll be talking with Ms. Alison Bernard, better known as Empress Ajay. She's one of those behind the promotion of this concert to pay respect to the life and the times and the music of Andre Tanker. Of course, we also have the staples with us, the Newsday question and the responses, and a look around the region. We'll tell you where we'll stop this morning. So those things are more on the program. But we go now to our discussion with Mr. Leroy George, who's the secretary of the organization called this Tobago Civil Net. When last we spoke, it had to do with this very issue about the state of affairs regarding the demands by the authorities for people in that area of Scarborough to move so that these construction works and these improvement works can take place. The matter was supposed to be heading to court when last we spoke. Mr. George, good morning.
Good morning.
How are you? Good to see you.
I'm good, and how are you?
Well, very fine, thanks. So tell us where we are this morning. So the High Court has given the green light for the state to continue acquiring these lands at Crown Point and the surrounding areas for the expansion of that $1.2 billion, or the $1.2 billion, we should put it that way, expansion project for the A.N.R. Robinson Airport. So what's the situation, given where we were when we last spoke a couple of weeks ago, as to the state of readiness for some of the people to move elsewhere? What are we looking at this morning, for instance?
Well, in terms of readiness, obviously, the state and the people are not totally ready. It still remains that in the Shervan Road area where a lot of these people are being transferred, there still isn't any electricity. So, of course, that is going to be a problem. Compensation is still not what it's supposed to be. And legally, a lot of what was supposed to happen hasn't happened. According to the Land Acquisition Act, whenever there is a conflict of opinions or beliefs when it comes to the cost of properties, it's supposed to be handled by the judiciary. I learned last night, I confirmed last night that that never happened in none of the cases. Was that situation handled by the judiciary? As you would have mentioned, the High Court threw out a couple injunction or attempts for injunctions to hold the process. That did not happen how it was supposed to happen either. And so the ignoble situation is still upon us.
So how was it supposed to happen in your view?
Okay, so given the information that came to me, the Tobago House of Assembly would have provided the lawyers that were used for that injunction, and some of the residents were of the understanding that the injunction was going to be filed by the Tobago House of Assembly to stop the project from happening until they are adequately compensated. However, a lot of them discovered very late that this wasn't the case, but the injunction expected would be given by the Tobago House of Assembly would be that it was the fact that central government is doing the project is contrary, very contrary with the 5th schedule of Act 40 of 1996, which states that airports, seaports, and infrastructure in general, but airports and seaports in particular, fall under the 33 responsibilities of the Tobago House of Assembly. However, what I was told just yesterday is that the information that was on the injunction, or the purpose given for the filing of the injunction, were basically on sympathetic notes. The fact that the areas that the state was providing them to move on didn't have electricity, the fact that the compensation wasn't what it's supposed to be, And I don't think the courts would have taken into consideration that the compensation query was never taken all the way to the court level. It was, as the Constitution, the Land Acquisition Act suggests, not suggests, but states, is supposed to happen.
So how correct it might be to think that the residents here are losing on a technicality?
They are losing on a technicality. So far, they are losing on a technicality. I'm not too certain, but I would like to imagine that perhaps an injunction could still be filed even now, because most of those houses are still standing erect, right? The 15th is right around the corner, but most of those houses are still standing erect, and some of those residents have not given up the fight. So I could imagine that if today or maybe even tomorrow an injunction is filed by the Tobago House of Assembly based on Act 40 of 1996, fifth schedule, as specific as that, and by the way, the first Chief Secretary of the Tobago House of Assembly, Mr. Hochoy Charles, he would have been the one that would have led us to this understanding. If that was to happen, we could possibly still have a happy ending to this story.
What can you tell us about the fifth schedule in relation to the act that you think that, gives hope in this instance?
Right, so the fifth schedule basically is just a list of 33 responsibilities that fall under the Tobago House of Assembly, and on that list you have infrastructure, and next to infrastructure on that list, I believe it's the 16th item on that list, they also say including air and sea ports. Now, there is a counter to this legal reality that has been brought up in the Tobago space by certain persons, but I don't believe by central government itself, which is that Section 75(1), I believe, of Act 1, don't quote me on the Act 1, but Section 75(1) in one act in the Constitution basically says that if there is authority that is held in any sub-government organization that oversteps the authority of central government, then central government has the right to basically avoid or make null and void whatever authority existed elsewhere. That being said, you would first have to have something in the Constitution that gives central government authority over the air and sea ports to counter what is in the Constitution about the Tobago House of Assembly having that, and I am not certain that exists at all at this point.
All right, in today's Newsday Tobago edition, one of the headlines says that there are 5 of the 7 families involved in this at this point are prepared to move. They reported to be prepared to move. There's a picture of the Chief Secretary, Mr. Augustine, talking with those residents in Crown Point on Sunday and saying that 5 of these 7 families are expected to, are saying that they are ready to move. So we're talking here about 2 people who are, in your view and in the view of others, not in a position to move. There's nowhere for them to go. Is that correct?
Well, prepared to move and happy or not feeling indignant about the situation is 2 very different things. Originally, the property owners are more than 100, it's about 120. And I've spoken to some of them who have moved already. One of them even almost completed a home. And yes, she was prepared to move since last year. But even to this day, she's indignant about what has happened. And they do feel as though they were bullied into this situation. So when you're speaking about 2 persons, you're not talking about 2 persons who have an opinion that is contrary to the other 118 or so persons that own properties. And of course, this is not 118 persons flat, that is just the property owners. Each of those property owners on average would have an entire family behind them. So you're looking at hundreds of persons. So it's not that they have an opinion that is contrary to the opinion of the rest. It's just that they're willing to stand by their opinion even when the others are no longer willing to put up a fight or no longer believe that they have the ability to put up a fight.
And it seems that the assembly itself is contributing to the arrangements under which some people are being required to move, because this story talks about the fact that there's a Ms. Phyllis Anthony, an 80-year-old person who will receive new accommodation from the THA, but that there's an Owen Melville who is described here as not being fully ready for this move tomorrow.
Right. So yes, the assembly is lending some support in terms of making sure that these persons don't find themselves on the street, and we must compliment the assembly for that, because you could have had a situation whereby these persons they don't have a place to go, period, right? And the assembly is providing some housing, believe it to be temporary housing, but housing all the same until these persons could get into a better position. I can't remember the exact figures as to how long they will be housed for, but the assembly is assisting in that respect.
Yeah, and one person, well, one family at least, the Alexanders, it seems as though they have some critical problems, and they're not in a position, from what the reading is here, to think about moving. What do you think will happen in that case?
Well, they're going to go into a state of extreme hardship. That's what's going to happen. And I would not be surprised, considering that when it comes to compensation, generally speaking, all the residents, let me just give one specific example. One resident that I spoke to, she would have had an evaluator that would have estimated the value of her property. Then the government evaluator, they would have estimated a figure that was not far from 50% of what her evaluator had established. So we understand the extent to which this is a problem, right? And in one case, I didn't speak to the particular owner of the property, but I know for a fact that in one case, they took it to the point which part you had a moderator, an official moderator come in to try to... The moderator would have provided an evaluator also, and the evaluator was the exact evaluator that the government used that came up with a figure that was more or less half the value of the property. So to answer your question, what's going to happen? A lot of people that were enjoying a particular lifestyle that would say, well, we're at this spot on the socioeconomic ladder, would find themselves dropped significantly below hardship. Hardship is, in short, one word, the result of what will happen to these individuals.
That seemed to have been a significant factor in this matter from day one. People are saying that through no fault of their own, through no initiative of theirs, they're being put in a situation where their standard of living, their sense of ownership and so on, the value of that is to be decreased with this move for this greater good, if they can even agree that it's a greater good that is at play here.
Yes, definitely. And again, just to emphasize, I know I would have mentioned this in the past two interviews that I did with you, but just to emphasize, they are moving from Crown Point, the area in Tobago, the area, singular, the area in Tobago, where access to goods and services is at its peak, to a lot of them to Shervan Road, where access to goods and services is about as bad as it could get in Tobago West. So not only have they gotten on average 50% of what their properties are worth, but they're also going into a situation where they'll need to spend more money to get the things that they usually could get for much cheaper and much easier. Well, not much cheaper, but much easier access to goods and services.
You think people are reluctant, even if they have concluded now that they have to move? People are less happy for this?
They're annoyed, they're very annoyed, they're very indignant. There's a lot of negative energy that the residents, and again, we're not just talking about the last 7 that were standing, we're not talking about the last 2 that are still standing. we're talking about the property owners and their families for the entire 120, the vast majority of them are very annoyed at what's happening. But it's always good to have what they call it, a silver lining amongst the dark clouds. And one of them is that throughout Trinidad and Tobago, so this becomes a bigger issue than just Crown Point, but throughout Trinidad and Tobago, a lot of persons are expecting to have to pay land taxes or property taxes. And if a way was found whereby persons were paid or compensated to the tune of about 50% of the value of their properties, depending on the evaluator you're speaking about. And from what I understand, when you have two different evaluators, the difference should not be in hundreds of thousands of dollars. But if you have a situation where one evaluator is able to evaluate to the tune of 50% of what another evaluator is evaluating at, then let's look at the property tax. Are they going to use the same formula that was used in Crown Point to determine the value of your home, my home, everybody in Trinidad and Tobago who owns property? And as a result, are we going to pay much less taxes? Or are they going to now try to change the style of evaluation to one which part persons have to pay a higher or equal to what one would really expect value for their property? And if we pay sufficient attention, I think property owners across Trinidad and Tobago may have a legal standing upon which, and definitely a moral standing upon which, to argue that, you know, our properties are worth less than what others may say otherwise, and as a result, we pay less land tax. So it's important that everybody in Trinidad and Tobago pay very close attention to what happened and what is presently happening in Crown Point.
All right, Mr. George, thank you very much. And I hope that we can speak in the days to come about the current situation with the leadership of the PDP and what is happening in the THA as a result of that. But thank you very much for talking with us on this issue. Leroy George, Secretary of the Tobago Civil Net Organization. We will take a break, and when we come back, we look at the Newsday poll, the question and the response. The matters we're also talking with Ms. Kezel Jackson on that very issue, about the break in the relations, it seems, between the political leader and the deputy political leader of the PDP, Mr. Duke, and Mr. Augustine. Stay with us. This is AM Prime on this Wednesday morning.
When you need land, a home, or investment property, Step-by-Step Property Consultancy and Management can help you. Call Step-by-Step today, 750-4442. It's convenient shopping. The new J&A Supermarket and Deli on the Avenue, Aripita Avenue, for all your grocery items, market items, grab-and-go meals, plus mobile phones and accessories. The Guide family has been serving TNT for over 80 years. JE Guide Funeral Home and Crematorium, 2 locations, San Fernando and Princestown.
Chantwell Vibes, a musical tribute to Andre Tanker. Saturday, September 24th, 2022. Central Bank Auditorium. Showtime, 7:30 p.m. Featuring 3 Canal, Mavis John, Ataclan, Empress Ajay, Stacy Sobers, and panist Natasha Joseph. Tickets, $300. Available at Crosby's Music Center, St. James. Extra Foods, Arima, Grand Bazaar, and Endeavour. Online at Island E-Tickets. Committee members at 678-2843 or 482-3111. Central Bank box office on the day of the event. Mart's Liquor Palace, Diego Martin Main Road, La Puerta. a musical tribute to Andre Tanker. Saturday, September 24th, 2022, Central Bank Auditorium. Showtime, 7:30 p.m.
All right, just about 6:33, 6:34 on this Wednesday morning. Time now for to take a look at the Newsday question and the responses. The Newsday poll, and the question this morning is, do you agree with the President of the Republic that the country deserves better when it comes to the conduct and behavior of members of Parliament? If so, why? If not, why not? So here are those responses. What the country really deserves is a president who doesn't break the Constitution she swore to uphold. That's one response. Another response, yes, our entire leadership needs to understand that they are there to serve the country, not to live like billionaires and elevate themselves and their families and friends. One other response, right words, wrong mouth. And the final response, we deserve better when it comes to her also. So those are the responses to the question. Comes from what the President said in her speech, the opening of the current term of the Parliament. We're speaking now with Ms. Kezell Jackson. She's Deputy Political Leader of the Progressive Democratic Patriots, the party that controls the Tobago House of Assembly 14-1, but she's the Deputy Political Leader for Trinidad Affairs. And she has come out saying that there is this row between the political leader of the party, so Mr. Watson Duke, and the deputy political leader, one of them, who is now the Chief Secretary in the Tobago House of Assembly, Farley Augustine, in an interesting situation in which Mr. Duke is Deputy Chief Secretary, and he is complaining publicly about the performance of Mr. Augustine. And Mr. Augustine responded in some ways. Ms. Duke is saying that Mr. Augustine needs to apologize in public to Mr. Duke. Ms. Jackson, good morning. Thanks for being available.
Pleasant good morning to you and your viewers.
Yeah. Well, what do you make of this in the first place? Can you talk about how this started? Mr. Duke seemed to be complaining about what happened to a group of people, folk performers, who went to New York. He said that they were reduced to sleeping on the streets. That seems to be an overstatement of some kind. You can't imagine people sleeping in the streets in New York. Mr. Augustine said that the question was money, and that the Assembly could not raise the money on its own when the time came, and he had to get agreement on a promissory note from the travel agency who made the tickets available. I'm not sure to what extent that was all that was needed. What do you know of the issue itself before we get to your position as to why you think Mr. Augustine should apologize?
Why I would have said so is the issue was never about the money. The issue was about a direct, immediate need of persons that belong to your own country, who were in a position requiring the basic need of survival, which is food. At that moment, the immediate need was to feed the people. Now, Mr. Augustine would have come out and said that the monies that he would have paid was not received. He had an interview yesterday with I-95.5, which he said that it was not amounting to, wasn't 400 and something thousand immediately, but 300 and something thousand that he would have paid via airfare, and the balance was supposed to be paid for accommodation. Now, these people would have arrived to their point of destination, which is the accommodation, to which that arrangement was not finalized properly. I do understand that. Then they having to seek an alternative arrangement, a temporary alternative arrangement, in which they would have gone somewhere else that was not probably conducive of people staying or sleeping, but, grateful enough that they had somewhere to rest their head. Now, when these persons would have reached out to the political leader of the Progressive Democratic Patriots, they would have reached out to him as a person that they would have seen representing their cause. Now, the ideal of the PDP is one that puts people before politics. Now, if we are to say we are putting the needs of people before politics, then how can the Chief Secretary, who was also the deputy political leader of the Progressive Democratic Patriots, expect his political leader, who campaign on the basis of putting people before politics, abandon his people in that moment? So the issue was never about the money. The issue was that there were 27 hungry people that were displaced. What can we do? He was appealing to the THA to render some aid. However, whatever can be done, do it immediately.
Well, why do you say that the people were displaced? I mean, can we talk a little about how this trip came about and whose trip it was, and to what extent the THA had an obligation to support the people?
This is where we are going wrong, because there's a scripture, Mr. Johnson, that is John 4:44. It says that a prophet is never appreciated in his own town, because I am hearing so many talks and people are they are moving away from the core of the matter. The core of the matter wasn't the trip and who organized the trip and who is responsible for the trip. The core of the matter is that there were 27 hungry people that belonged to your island that did not have the means in which to access food at the time. This is the core of the matter. We are running all around, going all over the place, talking about who was supposed to do what and playing the blame game, when the deputy chief was not alluding to such, was not speaking about who supposed to organize what, but to satisfy the basic need of these poor people.
So you're saying that in any circumstances, people come to the THA for assistance, regardless of what the situation is, the THA should be in a position to assist them?
I'm saying that was an emergency. There are different levels of requests and sometimes different levels of need. And the THA will not be able to satisfy every single need. We do understand that. But in cases of an emergency, there's emergency protocol. That was an emergency.
What do you know to be the availability of the means of meeting that protocol? If Mr. Augustine is saying, well, look, what we did is that we tried to assist with the passages for the people, why is it the responsibility of the assembly to find places for them to stay and so on? That's why I'm trying to get behind how this trip came about and so on. To what extent anybody in the association in the assembly had a responsibility for that.
Satisfy both travel as well as accommodation. He did agree. However, Mr. Johnson, I'll ask you something. Sometimes we come out there and we may meet people on the streets that may be hungry. And immediately we know for sure that they are hungry. Would we sit down and have a conversation about why they end up there in the first place? Or would we try to satisfy first the need of the hunger, and then we begin to have discussions? Because clearly it could have been done. Because if after all this what happened, Mr. Augustine found a way. We have to go back to that. He found a way. So why is he saying that he was asked to break protocol and this is not the way things happen in the THA when he in fact found a way?
Why do you think the matter became public? Why was it allowed to become public? Why couldn't it be settled in a different way?
Clearly, breakdown in communication between the chief secretary and the deputy chief secretary. Clearly, you could see there was an internal power struggle between the secretary and the deputy chief secretary, as well as between the political leader and the deputy political leader. Now, if your deputy chief secretary would have tried to contact you, and this is not the first or second or third time trying to contact the chief secretary, many persons in Tobago, they are cognizant of this, that the chief secretary is not one that would quickly answer or return messages. We do understand that he has a busy schedule, but if communication between both parties break down to such a state, then how do I get your attention? How do I satisfy the needs of these people? What do I have to resort to? How far do I have to go? These are many questions that one must ask themselves, because clearly there's an underlying issue.
Well, that is clear, and it seems to be, because Mr. Duke complained of some other things about trying to reach him and can't reach him, and not being assigned people who will work with him in a proper manner. He says, he describes the assistance that he's been given, and he's not happy about that. So clearly, as you say, there's a mountain of underlying issues between these two gentlemen. 6 months into an administration that they formed on the basis of the vote of the people in Tobago. What do you think the people in Tobago are thinking and saying this morning, for instance?
Any divide, any divorce, any separation, there will always be persons that will have an emotional detachment, pains. Any separation of any kind come with pains. They are always victims. And the victim in this case is the citizenry of Tobago, because they would have put their trust, their faith, they would have looked for something better by both leaders. They would have, the people demanded and expected better. When they said that if you had good time for better, then the people were expecting better. Put aside the ego, put aside the power struggle, and do what is best for the people, the citizenry of Tobago.
And are you ascribing the same sort of measure of responsibility for this question about putting aside ego here on both of them equally, or you think that one of them is more guilty of that than the other?
I would say that in a house, the son wouldn't tell the father to apologize. But the father, if the son did wrong, it is not the son's place. The son will come to the father and say, Father, Dad, I am sorry. My actions were wrong. I was grossly disrespectful. But it takes a lot from the father as well to acknowledge, if I could have done something differently, then do it differently. That is what I would say.
Yeah, and what do you make of Mr. Duke's complaint about the people who have been assigned to him? He describes them, I was reading something about that, in which he describes them as not up to the task, and he's suggesting that, at least my reading into it is that he was given these people such that he would not be able to perform in the manner that he wants to perform as Deputy Chief Secretary and Secretary for what he has been assigned in the administrative structure of the THA. He's complaining about those people who have been assigned to him.
I cannot speak on that. I would prefer to leave that for my political leader to speak about on another platform. I would not speak about that at this time.
Yeah. But it seems as though, I mean, a lot has gone wrong in these 6 months, and the extent to which some spotlight is put on that about Mr. Augustine's position being the Chief Sec. You think that Mr. Duke believes that he made an error in allowing this kind of leadership to take hold?
Well, sometimes when things are in its embryonic stage, you would hope and you would work towards forming something better. Sometimes when things are too early, anyone can say, well, give it time. To which I think the Deputy Chief Secretary was given time, did not want to seem as though I give you the responsibility to lead and then I want to take it back. I'm trying to micromanage you. But there were many things that went against what they campaign about. They campaign about not having transparency. They campaign against soul tendering. We would have witnessed in Tobago that many Trinidadian contractors are in fact getting large contracts to the extent where there is letters of consent, letters of award, sometimes without tender and sometimes just with one tender. I mean, it is legal, yes, but it would sometimes, one would question whether or not there is some level of corruption there in the selection process. These are many questions that were and are in the space of Tobago. Tobago is a small island. So when many persons are saying that, listen, there are contractors here from Trinidad, what about Tobago contractors? Why is it that these large contracts are being issued to Trinidadian contractors? Why is it that only small contracts are being tendered for the Tobago contractors? Many questions were being raised in that space.
What is an example of that? What is an example of that in a case in which a contract was awarded to a Trinidad contractor?
Tobago, with a contract for millions of dollars. There is, trying to remember the other contracting company. I don't know if they would have signed the letter of award as yet. There is Namalco, I'm not certain. And there are others in that space that would have, that are from Trinidad and us securing large contract from 75 million, 60 million. What about the people of Tobago?
And you don't think it's a question of merit and who could probably do the job? You're saying that you're probably sure that Tobago contractors can do the jobs that are given to contractors in Trinidad?
If we are moving to give Tobago a level of autonomy, then we must also empower the contractors of Tobago.
Yeah, and let's go back to your basic appeal in this case, that Mr. Augustine must apologize publicly to Mr. Duke for exactly what?
For gross disrespect. He came out on a platform, and he came out on a platform the first time, and he would have said that whoever you may be, using the word crook in that statement, and then saying to the public that he would remove, if he has to, he remove all responsibilities and duties under the portfolio of the Deputy Chief Secretary. That is saying that he would make his position redundant. Now, in procedures and protocol, the Deputy Chief Secretary should not, via a media conference, whether it's social media or general media, hear that his portfolio is being reviewed. This is not procedure and protocol. Were there any meetings, any letters issued? Nothing of that sort. It was based purely on emotion and ego and gross disrespect on the part of the former deputy political leader and the present chief secretary, but whoever that may be.
But Mr. Duke put himself in this situation to some extent. Don't you think that he's the leader of the party? He opted to put somebody else as chief secretary while he operates as deputy chief secretary, because in the beginning there we weren't sure, after these results that came down so overwhelmingly on the side of the PDP, for him to decide to put somebody else to be the chief sec, and he takes a position as deputy chief sec. For the few days before that, we didn't know where he would end up, as a matter of fact, and there was all of that kind of uncertainty about what was his role going to be. And then no sooner than that had settled down, he decided to launch a foray into Trinidad now. He's going around communities trying to... yes, go ahead.
Mr. Farley Augustine is well aware of the initial plans, and the initial plans was also to come to Trinidad. The initial plans, one of which was to come to Trinidad and to go for the general, both local and general election of Trinidad and Tobago. Because the only way one could really seek the autonomy of Trinidad is to have the government of Trinidad and Tobago. Yes, and there was a Tobago politician who was Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, and who fought a raging battle for that as well, and to the extent that he was successful in getting autonomy for Tobago in the way that it is required, that is still under review. Yes, Mr. Johnson. All right, okay, so talk a little bit about what the role and function of a deputy political leader of the PDP in Trinidad is about, and what your duties and responsibilities are. Well, again, my duties and my first duty is to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. I would not say just Trinidad, because one thing doesn't happen in isolation of the other. We saw that just about 2 years ago. COVID-19 started in China, which is so many miles away. And we were and are affected. So much so, even the human body, the heart affects the lungs affect the liver. We are interrelated and interconnected. I would say, as the interim deputy political leader, my responsibility is to the people of my country.
And that's Trinidad and Tobago.
Trinidad and Tobago. I would never put an isolation to say Trinidad and not Tobago, but I will always say Trinidad and Tobago.
All right, we're going to leave it there, but let me just get you to reinforce that point. So you're saying that the party always knew, and to some extent you think that people would have known that Tobago is simply launching a beachhead that will spread to Trinidad, and that was always, you think people familiar enough with the PDP recognize that, because you know, when the Trinidad foray was kind of launched, one of my questions was that what the people in Tobago voted for?
Mm-hmm. Well, when things are new, and again, when things just started, it was dependent on the success of Tobago, of course. So the success of Tobago and the indication of the need of Tobago and what the people would have requested and what the people would have voted for, it was upon that basis that they could have made other plans to come into the island of Trinidad.
All right, we're gonna have to leave it there, but thank you very much for talking with us, Ms. Kezell Jackson, Deputy Political Leader for the Progressive Democratic Patriots in Trinidad. Thank you very much.
You're most welcome.
All right, let's take a look around the region now. We start that with Guyana. The discussions have begun with suppliers of oil and gas there. We hear more in this report from News Source Guyana.
The Local Content Secretariat today announced that it has started advanced discussions on the protracted payment periods for suppliers of goods and services in the oil and gas sector and building of the capacity of suppliers. The Secretariat reminded that under the Local Content Act, it is required that the contractors and subcontractors procurement subplan include a supply chain management strategy, which should promote local suppliers' competitive financing and growth with appropriate contract and payment terms. The provision was created to ensure that Guyanese nationals and Guyanese companies generate capital to expand while becoming competitive and financially independent. With the government and the private sector examining a 30-day payment period for Guyanese and Guyanese businesses which supply goods and services to the petroleum sector, contractors and subcontractors have been written to, with instructions for them to implement an amendment to their 5-year local content master plan. The updated 5-year plan must now include a payment period of between 30 to 45 days upon the correct receipt of an invoice. The Local Content Secretariat believes that the move will allow Guyanese companies timely and appropriate access to contract and payment terms that facilitate competitive funding and expansion. The Secretariat added that contractors and subcontractors have shown their willingness to cooperate with the new requirement and have already moved to make the amendment to their master plans. They added that the suppliers must know that the onus is now on them to submit correct invoices. To see that that is achieved, the Secretariat says it continues to encourage contractors and subcontractors to conduct continuous training and suppliers engagement forums. The forum will be aimed at upskilling suppliers in areas of the correct preparation of invoices and tenders, and to be appraised of any upcoming procurement opportunities being offered by the companies. Suppliers who continue to encounter issues with the prolonged issuing of payments are asked to contact the Local Content Secretariat.
All right, to Jamaica now, where there's a dispute which has left a man dead and his 2-year-old daughter fighting for her life, as we hear in this report from TVJ.
The Browns Hall police in St. Catherine received reports that there was a physical altercation between a man and his common-law wife who he was visiting. The man, who was armed with a gun, left the house with their 2-year-old daughter.
When I passed the baby, we see him because we ends out. So we did it. And we see him pass the baby, and father run come down. The baby grandfather run come down and set away. You know, see the man that go with the baby. So when him hold the baby, you know, him left hand and him have him right hand hold on the gun. So we couldn't move to him. So him walk and gone.
In their attempt to respond to the incident, the lawmen were fired at.
When the shooting subsided, it was discovered that front bedroom window and the house the damage. That scene was processed. Other police personnel were called in, in fact, specialized operations and the SWAT team were mobilized to the location.
But it wasn't until this morning that a search was launched for the two.
During the searching in the area, we also heard other gunshots. Eventually, they found the lifeless body of the suspect. And the child.
This is the window that the lady said that
the child was rushed to the Bustamante Hospital for Children, where it was later discovered that she had been shot in the abdomen. At news time, she was still undergoing surgery. The man has since been identified as former security guard, 45-year-old Cleon Black.
Here at WESN News on the Hour, I am Denise Sinclair. Thanks for joining us. Here are the headlines. Sangre Grande Alderman confirms motion was filed against UNC Alderman. MSJ head criticizes the national security system. Hazardous sea alert yellow level in effect. And internationally, Syria cholera outbreak serious threat to region. Now for the details. Alderman Daniel Marshall Piper of the Sangre Grande Regional Corporation has revealed that members of the PNM within the corporation have officially filed a motion against Alderman Susan Holder of the United National Congress and are awaiting Chairman Anil Duturam to call a statutory meeting. On WSN's Talking Point, Alderman Piper says the resignation of Alderman Holder from the corporation and all corporation committees are to be moved during the hearing of the motion.
The members of the People's National Movement have officially, we presented our motion to be debated to the CEO and to the chairman of the corporation. They are to respond within 7 days. We would have given them the motion Thursday. So we are just waiting for that feedback from the chairman to call the statutory meeting in order for us to have that motion debated. Our motions are to remove her as chairman of the committees that she currently holds, which would be the chairman of finance and also the chairman of the local economic development committee, and also to call for her resignation.
MSJ head David Abdullah alleges that the national security system is designed by style and little to no action is taken to deal with critical matters.
These issues are not new, and therefore it could only be the absence of political will and that those in charge of the country are just not interested in dealing seriously with corruption. And therefore they allow these things to go continue, and the problems have escalated to the point where we are now. The scanners issue can't be a new issue, you're right. So why hasn't it been put into effect? Because there are people who just don't want that to happen.
A hazardous seas alert yellow level is in effect for Trinidad and Tobago until Thursday at 8 p.m. Long period swells of up to 15 seconds have been observed nearby and will eventually affect the vulnerability of the near shore and coastal areas of Trinidad and Tobago. Sea bathers, fishermen and small craft operators should carefully monitor coastal sea conditions. In international news now. The UN has expressed concern about the first confirmed cholera outbreak in Syria in years, saying it poses a serious threat to the entire region. More than 900 suspected cases and 8 deaths have been reported in the war-torn country in the past 3 weeks. It is believed to be linked to people drinking contaminated water from the river Euphrates, which flows through the provinces, and using it on crops. Well, that was your news to the hour on WESN. I am Denise Sinclair. Thanks for watching.
Chantwell Vibes, a musical tribute to Andre Tanker, Saturday, September 24th, 2022, Central Bank Auditorium. Showtime, 7:30 p.m. Featuring Three Canal, Mavis John, Ataclan, Empress Ajay, Stacy Sobers, and panist Natasha Joseph. Tickets, $300. Available at Crosby's Music Center, St. James. Extra Foods, Arima, Grand Bazaar, and Endeavour. Online at Island E-Tickets. Committee members at 678-2843 or 482-3111. Central Bank box office on the day of the event. Mart's Liquor Palace, Diego Marte Main Road, La Puerta. A musical tribute to Andre Tanker. Saturday, September 24th, 2022. Central Bank Auditorium. Showtime, 7:30 p.m.
Welcome back to the program. I think it's interesting and important to read the notes that I'm provided with here this morning as we lead into this discussion that is to come. It's called Chantwell Vibes, a musical tribute to Andre Tanker. It is a presentation of Empress Ajay. Margaret Gittins is the producer, Rodney Alexander, the musical director, Carol LaChapelle, the choreographer. It says Andre Tanker was a master musician and composer who transitioned from this physical plane 19 years ago. His music is known worldwide and its compositions have influenced the styles of many musicians today in Trinidad and Tobago. This event is an effort to preserve and to make known the music of icon Andre Tanker. We're talking now with the producer of it, the executive producer, Alison Empress Ajay Bernard. Good morning, ma'am.
Hi, morning.
Well, good to have you. Well, let me ask you about this production. I want to start by asking you why now, how now?
Well, now is as good a time as any, but why now? Because amidst the cries or amidst murmurs of, persons in the industry or patrons rather crying out for good music, talking about it seems we are losing the music of yesteryear. And whilst we have to accept that generations will change, and as with everything else, things will revolutionize and change, I thought about that coming from patrons, coming from people who, for want of a better phrase, appreciate good music. And I say that because different people would like different types of music. But, the type of music that brings healing to the soul, the type of music that leaves us on a high, it seems like it's kind of scarce these days. So apart from getting the inspiration, of course, because for me, I don't just jump up and do things. It is spiritually guided. It is well thought about. Everything more or less meshed together. And to top it off, I spoke with Tamba Gwindi, who played with Andre Tanker for 17 years. I threw the idea out at him, and it was remarkable to know or to learn from Tamba that he was along the same wavelength, getting that same inspiration, that same vibe to do something for Andre Tanker. So that more or less came as the confirmation. And last but not least, Andre Tanker's birthday is in the month of September. I believe it is September 29th. Wikipedia has it as September 26th or somewhere around there. But checking in with his daughter, Zomari, she said the correct date is September 29th. So that sums it up as to the why now that I am doing this show.
Right. I had this question down the list of my notes before me this morning, but I'll bring it up and ask to what extent you personally...
Hello?
Hello?
Yes, I'm hearing you.
Right. I was saying that I had this question further down the list, but I'd bring it up based on some of your comments earlier on. So what extent, talk with us a little bit about the extent to which his music influenced you in your own development as an artist and so on.
Right. I have always been a fan of Andre Tanker. I never met him personally, but his music, his style, you know, using the African rhythms, and we know he would have used not just the African rhythms, Indian rhythms, even Latin. His music always impacted on me because, you know, that's my style of music, that Chantwell rhythm. But I never got the chance to really do his covers or sing his music except when I started doing my own events in 2019. So that was my opportunity. I always do Andre Tanker music in my set. So it came easy for me now. It's like getting a chance to really show off, as they would say, you know, and embrace his music on the stage. But it has always influenced me, always. Sayamanda is actually my favorite.
Yeah, I want to talk about his song. When he had gone away and he came back and he made this song, I Went Away, and so on and so on, and I come back to stay, I must see my way. I want to get to that in a moment, but let's stay with the production. So how long has this been in the works for you to bring this off?
Actually, immediately after, in terms of thought process, immediately after Iba, which was my last production, Mother's Day, immediately after that, you know, the team met and we discussed it. And of course, once the date was agreed upon, we start working on it. You can say 3 months. Within the space of 3 months, started putting things together.
Yeah, and you mentioned it a little bit a while ago about how what his music meant to you. You want to talk a little bit about that, expand on that a little bit?
If one was to listen to the lyrics of Andre's music, it's life. It's very simple, but it's very impactful. The lyrics of his song, it speaks to you directly. There must be an Andre Tanker song that anybody, you know, any one person can relate to. As you said previously, Forward Home, which actually tells of his experience going in a foreign land, whether it's America, Canada, or where have you, and realizing, listen, home is home. And I'm sure many people can relate to that, about coming back home after, as we would say, trying it in another country. So when you hear that song, I know for me, I can say, I at one time was living in United States, and I forward back home because, you know, for circumstances, at the end of the day, home is home. So that song really resonated with me. There's another one, Creation of the World,
yeah,
which basically he is saying, we are all children of one great love. Regardless of which part of the globe we are all children of one great love. You know, it's such a spiritual healing song, that Creation of the World. All of Andre's song, all of Andre's song speaks to you directly.
Sayamanda.
One. Oh, Sayamanda is rhythm, is energy, is celebration, you know. And reading how he came up with the name, it is as if the name was in error to mean Imande. But the song itself, from Trinidad to North Carolina, behind the bridge, across the border, hold on, you know. It's Chains of Freedom, you know. It's difficult to talk a song. It's easier to sing it, but Chains of Freedom across the world. Give them children a hand to hold. And it's very much what is happening now and what we would like. We really want to offer the children a hand to hold, to strengthen them. He is really phenomenal, a master musician and composer.
He was. I'm talking about he had a song about the wild Indians in the carnival. And
yes, wild Indian. You know, and I've listened, honestly, I must mention that his daughter Zomari, so very involved in this production, you know, in terms of we would have wanted lyrics, the artists, because like I was asked previous, not on this show, if the artists are doing at least one Andre Tanka song. I said at least one. The show is Andre Tanka songs. Guest artists will do one of their own composition, but Andre Tanka songs. That's what you're going to hear. So I had to liaise with her to get his music, the lyrics, and While Indian was one of them that I must confess I wasn't too familiar with, but I became familiar with so many of his songs. Another favorite is Smokey Joe.
Yes.
Smokey Joe, I mean, that is a carnival character, what we might call the Sailor Mask. Yeah. And you know, it's a pity that a lot of people don't know, and when I mean a lot, more the younger generation don't know Andre's music. And when you read, before you brought me on, you talk about the preservation of the music, and that is so important, not just for Andre Tanka, but for all our icons, those who are here and those who would have transitioned. It's important to preserve the music.
Yeah, Smokey Joe play a big time mass, Purple Velvet and Shining Brass.
Purple Velvet and Shining Brass. Right to tongue on a golden throat. King of the road.
In a world of his own. What about his music before that? Before he came out as Andre Tanka per se, he had this band called Andre Tanka and the Flamingos. Did you dip into that at all?
Yes, that is in his early days.
Yes. Yes,
the Flamingos. And if I remember correctly, they used a lot of Latin flavor back then.
Yeah.
He did a lot of Latin music with the Flamingos. As I said, his early days. And of course, speaking with Zomari, until the music progressed, even with his collaboration or involvement with Andrew Bido. You remember the Bido brothers?
Yes, of course. And in that period, there was he sort of brought the drumming in the music to the forefront, and that moved a lot of people. Yeah.
Yes, you know, as he said in an interview I read, where the first time he heard Andrew Bido was at the Little Carrick Theatre, and he heard the drumming and wasn't too fascinated then, but eventually, you know, it got under his skin, and we know the rest now. Once we listen to Andre's music, you know, that rhythm, it's so infectious. It is so infectious.
So I want to ask you about the role and functions of a couple of the people listed here as part of the production. Musical director Rodney Alexander. Let's talk a little bit about him.
Okay, well, Rodney has been in the industry for the last 24 years. He started off with Invasion. We would remember Invasion with Nia George. Actually, that's where Fayan started off. Fayan Lyon started off singing. He's from Point Fortin.
Yes.
And his musical career he would, as he said to me, would have been playing the guitar prior to being in a big band. But that is where his international, you know, played. Hello?
Yes, I'm hearing you.
Yes. He would have played with Alison Hines. Actually, he toured with Alison Hines for like 7 years. You know, we all know the Bajan soca queen, Alison Hines. He played with people like Richie Spice. He actually plays presently with Bonnet Bickford. He has a wealth of knowledge musically, you know, that spans not just in Trinidad and Tobago, but internationally. And that's the man who is responsible for the band, a band of competent musicians. If I could just plug in a couple of them, we have Emil Fortune on keyboard. We have Kyle Peters on guitar. Tamba Gwindi, the iconic Tamba Gwindi, who played with Andre Tanka for 17 years.
He's a percussionist extraordinaire.
Oh yes, percussionist extraordinaire. Tamba is among the band. We have Kevin O'Keefe, who is the drummer. He played with Destra Garcia for quite a number of years. We have Sean Singh, who is on the drum, the djembe drum, what we call the African drum, right? We have Natasha Joseph. She is the featured panist. And Andre Tanker, you know, had this special love for the steel pan.
Yeah, and choreography by Carol LaChapelle.
Carol LaChapelle, yes. Because they're, and I don't want to give away the show really, but we have sprinkling of dancing in between. You know, that's all I would say. And of course, for such a iconic show, for such a show with that sort of quality and vision, we need someone equally magical. And Carol LaChapelle, we know, I mean, her resume, her achievements is probably too much to mention on the show. But the ever competent Carol LaChapelle, and of course, Margaret Gittins, who I call Auntie Margaret, she's huge. She's huge in all areas. Margaret embraces anything that she is involved in. She gives it her all. She's very meticulous. It must be done to perfection. Margaret is so much. She is family. You know, when Margaret inside something, she deal with you. I don't know what I would have done without her, to be honest. She like to say, you know, you artists, you know, she said, I can't figure you all out. But I tell her, well, I can't figure you out either. You know, it's just two dynamic minds working together. And it's really, really a dynamic team. And if I was to even echo something that she always says, you know, she said, Empress, you don't, but that era, it played in my home as well when growing up with my parents. And that is another conversation I had recently with someone. Back then, I was exposed to all genres of music, gospel, you know, all types of music. And I did the same with my children. I'm a mother of two. That one day I walked in my son's room and I heard him play the Bee Gees. I was shocked. I said, but what do you know about the Bee Gees? But I forgot I had all types of music playing in the home.
Yeah.
And he paid attention, and it impressed upon him that I walked in his room one day and he was playing the Bee Gees. I said that to say, sometimes you never attend a person's show or meet the artist personally, but their music reach you. A lot of international people would have impressed upon us. We never met them. But that's the power of music. That's the power of positive music.
Yeah. So it doesn't say here when the show is and what are the things around it. When is it?
Right. So the show is on the 24th, Republic Day.
Yeah.
You know, so fitting a national musical icon and a national festival day. It's at Central Bank Auditorium. And, well, I know everyone is familiar with Central Bank Auditorium. And the show starts at 7:30 p.m. And I must say, we do not start late. You cannot start a show late with Margaret Gittins involved. Let's just say that. You know, I remember the last production. People were giving me the joke after that. They taken the time and park and couldn't believe that the anthem was played. You know, they said, nah, man, we were walking a few minutes late and couldn't believe while they're in the car park, they hear the show done start already. Yes, it's going to start on time, 7:30 p.m. Central Bank Auditorium. The artists, we have Tricanal, who needs no introduction. Yeah. We have Auntie Mavis John, well, again, no introduction. We have myself, Empress Ajay, Stacey Sobers, Calypso Monarch finalist on about 3 occasions. We have Atta Clan.
Yes.
Atta Clan, who says to me, listen, Empress, Andre was like family, you know. Yeah. Yeah, and that's the cast. Not a very big cast, but a very effective cast, a very magical cast.
Everybody has some measure of distinction in their own right. How long did it take to put it together from conceptualization to finalization?
For me, I need 3 months. Or let's say 2 months, you know, but ideally 3 months from day one to full production. But the thought process, everything starts with a thought.
Yeah.
That, of course, plays a role in your mind for as long as with different people. but to bear fruits, to come to fruition. For me, I think 3 months is comfortable because you want to get rid of your heavy stuff early in the game. I'm a person don't like to hustle. I don't do last minute unless I cannot avoid it. And there are some things we have no control over, but once I can control certain happenings, I like to action things out and have a nice, as stress-free as possible coming down towards the show. So all around now, yes, you have obvious things to deal with, but it mustn't be the heavy stuff. Those things must be action out early. And it works well for everyone involved. So we on rehearsal, we're rehearsing, we have a rehearsal this evening. You're focusing on your music. So all the only small stuff we're dealing with at this point. So 3 months again, to go back to your question, is a comfortable time frame.
All right, so once again, it's September 24th at the Central Bank Auditorium.
Central Bank tickets are $300, only $300 for that type of music. Listen, you cannot go wrong. And door prizes.
All right.
How can we have a show without door prizes? We have some wonderful door prizes. For example, Andy, when last you went to a show or hear of an event that a door prize is a medical checkup,
wow,
a detailed medical checkup? That's just an example of our door prizes. Medical doctor.
Yes.
That's one of our door prizes. So it's a whole package. It's a complete package. I urge patrons to get there early because we will have cocktails. Angostura would be there giving cocktails to patrons, but we only have an hour to do that. So you must get there early. That is between 6:30 and 7:30, where you can have that hour to,
right, so that's great incentive for attendance. But thank you very much, Empress Ajay Bernard. Andre Tanker, looking back at his music and his contribution to music and cultural development in Trinidad and Tobago, September 24th. Thank you very much.
That's it.
All right, so let's take a look at this now. Thank you very much. Let's take a look at this now. We call it the Watch This. The UK police have released a statement saying that people do not have the right to protest the monarch. This follows a backlash from crackdowns on protesters at key locations where many have been mourning the Queen.
I was holding up a blank sign. Why are you asking for my details?
You said you were going to write stuff on it that may offend people.
I said I was going to write "Not My King" on a sign, and you asked for my details.
It may offend someone.
Who's that going to offend?
I don't know. Someone may.
Not my king. Someone might be offended.
Are you going to listen or are you just going to talk over me? Is that what you plan to do? Just talk over me continuously?
We have seen protesters holding up cards saying they don't want a new king, they don't want a monarchy, and a few people booing, and they have been arrested up and down the country, and I think that is outrageous. We are a democratic country, we are an open, disputatious country where we can say what's on our minds, and I don't believe for a moment that this is what the new king would have wanted. In fact, I would bet a lot of money the new king is equally alarmed and upset by the fact that protesters are being arrested.
And that's our broadcast for this Wednesday morning. We thank you very much for staying with us. We thank you for watching. We tell you can get in touch with us here at AM Prime at WESNCC and all our social media platforms. Send your emails to amprime@wesncc.com. In half an hour, we have news at the top of the hour, followed by today's edition of Talking Point with Messrs. Shah and Small. But for now, I'm done here. Thanks for watching. I'm Andy Johnson. We see you tomorrow.
WESN.